Welcome this afternoon to the Time is Now Best Practices in Driving Diversity and Inclusion in the Legal Profession, CLE. Our sponsor is Alaris, and we want to thank them for helping us put together a really remarkable panel for you. We're hoping to give you some practical advice and tips and ideas on these issues. This CLE has been approved for 1.2 ethics hours in Missouri and 1 hour of ethics in Arkansas. There are a couple of housekeeping matters I want to address, and then I'm going to introduce our panel and we're going to get started. Please visit Alaris ADR website for more details on future webinars. That's www.alarisadr.org or .us. After the webinar is concluded, you will receive a survey. We are always looking for ways to improve. So we look forward to you sharing your comments about the presenters. You will receive a certificate of attendance, usually within 48 hours of the webinar. If you're joining by phone only, this is a tip that you should send an email to marketing@alaris.us so that we make sure you receive your certificate of attendance. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A link, and we'll do our best to address them with the presenters. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to to introduce these speakers, and I'm gonna introduce them in reverse order. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Joan Swartz, and I'm a local attorney here in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a sole practitioner, and I have practiced for 33 years in the area. And if we call up the slides, if you guys are really bored, you can read a little bit about my background on the slide. But I want to get to our speakers because we have a lot to cover. Our first speaker, he won't be our first speaker, he's gonna be our second, but I want to introduce to you Joel Stern from the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms, NAMWOLF as it's called. Joel is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of NAMWOLF. NAMWOLF was founded in 2001. It's a not-for-profit trade association comprised of over 195 minority and women-owned law firms in 44 states. NAMWOLF's mission is to provide corporations the premier place to go to locate and hire minority and women-owned law firms of the very highest caliber. Prior to being CEO at NAMWOLF, Joel was Deputy General Counsel and COO of Legal at Accenture, where he managed all operation functions with America's Legal Group. And he has a unique background in building diversity and inclusion programs. We also have with us Jonathan Lovitz. Jonathan is a nationally recognized LGBT business and public policy advocate. He's currently serving as the Senior Vice President of the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. That's its initials are NGLCC. At the NGLCC, he serves as both national spokesperson and political lobbyist, and he is responsible for establishing the more than a dozen county, city, and state laws passed over the last 4 years, opening up contracting and economic opportunity to the LGBT business community. Lovitz is a regular commentator on MSNBC, CNBC, NPR, The Advocate, Bloomberg, among others, and he has also spoken and fundraised for related causes. And last but not least, we have Rod Chappell of the Chappell Law Group. Rod is an old friend of mine. He is a Missouri trial lawyer and former commissioner of the Administrative Hearings Commission, who has dedicated his professional and private life to helping people stand up for their rights. Rod founded the Chappell Law Group to create a vehicle for the protection of workers and their families, though not only the court system, but also administrative and legislative avenues and venues. Chappell's advocacy has protected the rights of workers in Missouri, impacted multi-million-dollar settlements, and helped to make Missouri a safer place to live and work for everyone. Rod is also a mediator and arbitrator on the lawyers panel. What is not on your slide, if you are seeing it, of his background, is Rod is also the current president of the NAACP here in Missouri. So he's uniquely qualified to give us some insights on issues related to diversity and inclusion from that perch, which is quite an honor. I want to start with Rod, and I'm going to pose this question for you as we are looking at issues related to diversity, inclusion, and legal profession. And that is, Rod, is this a tipping point at this current time, looking at what we, recent developments in diversity, inclusion, or is this just another wave we're seeing?
Hey, thanks, Joan, and such a pleasure to be with you all today. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you to Alaris for sponsoring this wonderful program and assembling this panel. I have to tell you that the NAACP, if you were to look at some of the concerns raised specifically in the state of Missouri and probably the country, has been trying to shine a light on the issues that are critical to diversity and inclusion. And in my mind, you can kind of sum that up with dignity. Are we going to treat people as people? Are we going to respect their rights? And what happens when we don't? Is there a means for redress when we see problems? The NAACP in 2017 issued the first ever travel advisory. The idea behind the travel advisory was recognizing that in the legislative arena, you know, where we would normally ask for laws to be passed to change the way that discrimination and lack of inclusion, if you will, are being addressed, or even to promote inclusion, that those doors were really shut to us because of some policy decisions made by the controlling party. At the same time, we were very concerned about other issues, which would normally relate to local control concerns in terms of, you know, how are the police treating motorists, what's happening when individuals find themselves within the criminal justice system, are the results fair, and then ultimately, is there a means of redress in the civil system? Well, I can tell you, our review and our advocacy over the many, at least the last 20 years, demonstrates that if you're a person of color, you're going to be pulled over more than anyone else in the state of Missouri, even though the searches would demonstrate that there's less contraband than for other groups, say, for example, our Caucasian brothers and sisters. That's problematic because that's an infringement, in our view, on our ability to travel up and down the roadways. It's unnecessary, and ultimately it's a waste of resources. The time, certainly, of the individuals being pulled over, and then also whether or not that's a good stewardship issue. Are we spending our local dollars effectively? You know, if there are other folks that you can go pull over, go pull them over and stop whatever crime that you can. No one would suggest that you shouldn't do that, but it should be on a much more fairer basis. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, if you will, because we had anecdotal stories such as Torrey Sanders, who literally took a wrong turn out of Tennessee, found himself in southern Missouri, down in Mississippi County, was never arrested for a crime. They pulled him in, did some kind of a 12-minute evaluation, decided that he was fine to leave, but instead of at the end of that evaluation, or even after an hour after that, so you can process some paperwork or whatever, he was not allowed to leave and ended up dying in a Mississippi County jail cell with a sheriff's knee on the back of his neck. Never have there been any criminal charges brought in the case, despite then governor at the times, Eric Greitens, or now Senator Josh Hawley's promise that there would be a thorough investigation, which was completed by the Highway Patrol, but unfortunately never acted upon by a prosecutor. That's scary. It's scary because if we as individuals can't be assured that justice is going to be applied, even when everything goes wrong, then that doesn't leave much reassurance in our faith in democracy and law enforcement, and ultimately the courts, that there is going to be a process to adjudicate these concerns. When people got to court, however, as a result of these traffic stops or other criminal charges, we found that the impact of issues such as bias had an exaggerated effect on sentences being issued for the same conduct, and whether or not the similar cases were going to be prosecuted. And one of the basis of that was race, just what color is the person. And that plays out horribly, by the way, in the death penalty and its application in Missouri. You can actually track where the death penalty is at, and you can see that if you are a person of color or a poor person, that you stand a much better chance of getting the death penalty, and especially if your victim was Caucasian or a Caucasian female. That would kind of be the trifecta in almost ensuring that the result of your prosecution would have a better chance than anyone else in the entire state of being held up in a death penalty circumstance. And that's really, really terrible. We recognize that in the NAACP, and we've been talking about that for decades in conjunction with partners such as the ACLU or the Missourians for the Alternatives to the Death Penalty, just calling for justice in these cases. And then in 2017, the worst thing that I've seen in a while happened. Governor Greitens signed a bill to prevent individuals from bringing discrimination suits against the individual that did it in state court. So right now, if you have a coworker and they call you a bad name, or they assault you and call you a bad name, or do any of those things, whether they pay you less or any of the discriminatory issues that happen to people in protected categories, you can't sue the person that did it. You can still sue the business, so you can sue them, but that doesn't say much for accountability of the individual who has caused harm to that other person. And that's not right. We believe that that is part and parcel of Jim Crow and a step backwards. At the time, it was articulated as we're joining the federal standard. But the truth is that law professors from WashU to Washburn said that's not the case, that this is a complete departure, and indeed the feds essentially defunded the programs that we had to enforce civil rights within Missouri on various levels. Now, some of that's been restored, particularly related to housing after a change in the law. This is not where Missouri wants to be. We are not those people. I think that ultimately we believe in the rule of law, and that we recognize that until we start treating people with dignity, until we can demonstrate that we have a healthy population that is getting good education and that gets along, the businesses aren't really going to want to come to Missouri. And so it's no small wonder that, there's been an economic downturn even before COVID came, with manufacturing concerns. And some of those, I won't even name them, saying that, hey, if things don't change, we're not staying here in Missouri. We don't want to be here. And that's unfortunate because our families are here and we need to have some commerce to make sure that everybody can live. But just as importantly, we've got to be able to participate in that system. And so I think that those are some of the issues that have led to people protesting in the streets. And to paraphrase Martin Luther King, the voice of the demonstrators is really that of the voiceless in the system. If you are shut out of the legislature, because we don't have money or power, to be honest with you, if the doors to the courthouse are being closed, and that's the only branch that really cares about individuals and what they're talking about, calls you by name and talks about justice at the same time, if those doors are closed, and then of course the executive branch is not being responsive. For example, we can see now with the COVID pandemic, Blacks are on the leading edge of death. There is no plan to talk about how we're going to alleviate that as a concern. So you have these issues that, whether we call them systemic racism or benign neglect, right? But this is not really that benign because it's really having a tremendous effect. People are dying, communities are being decimated, and it's continuing. We've got to find some way to try to deal with that. I think talking about it in here, not only do we have an opportunity to frame the issue, but we as lawyers, what Houston referred to as social engineers, have an opportunity to talk about how we're going to make sure that the good moral fabric of our communities are reflected in our practice. And I have a couple of thoughts about why it's important too. I'm a trial lawyer. I love going to trial, and up until COVID hit, I had 2+ trials every month. Except for July, when I was going to go to scout camp with my sons, and December, when I was going to take off for the holidays and just to kind of enjoy a little bit. But of course, all those are off. The problem though is, and what this really highlights is that when we get to court, there can be situations where the things that we say can completely turn off jurors. And it's not necessarily that, you know, anybody's going to go in and start using racial epithets in court. That would just be ridiculous. But using phrases that have the same kind of, that will draw the same feelings from minority populations, whether or not the folks who are uttering those phrases know it. You know, one of those that I recently saw with a prosecutor named Mark Richardson, who used to be here in Cole County. He's no longer in the position, in part because of some of these stands. And because he's a public official, I don't mind naming him. But when the Medicaid 23 were on trial, now these are preachers essentially from all over the state, most of them people of color. And the prosecutor referred to them as those people, and that they wouldn't be safe to have around children like in the Capitol and needed to be watched. And he actually wanted them to go to jail for praying in the Senate gallery. So he was extreme in a couple of different ways, but you don't want to be like him, ignoring those kinds of statements that can really prevent you from doing your job, regardless of how you really feel, right? So if he hadn't said that, then maybe people wouldn't have been so offended. But so, you know, referring to Black people as those people or you people, and not appropriate, and is going to cause a problem. Likewise, are procedural issues that are sometimes thought of as being benign. For example, jurors and deciding who to strike. The same prosecutor was taken up on the Court of Appeals because he had a practice of striking Black jurors. Now, I understand that prosecutors do that, that is one of the techniques that they think, and I don't know why anyone on earth would believe that just because of the color of one person's skin, that they would be less likely to return a guilty verdict, because it turns out that people who commit crime do that not just in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. The society as a whole is victimized, and that's why everybody needs to be represented on those juries. But when it came out that he literally was making notes about who was Black and to strike the Black people, and that was his practice, the Court of Appeals said, don't do that, not good. And so all those people had to, that were victims of that practice, were able to take their trials back to court. Well, what a waste of judicial resources, and what a waste of the time of the individuals who had been charged, of the lawyers' time on both sides. We can do better than that. And frankly, that creates some concern for the public in our practice and how we do business. You know, they always think that we're in some back room making a shady deal, even though that's not the case. That's one thing that we could always do. And heaven forbid, you've probably seen some of the other headlines about lawyers who have said or done things in their private lives, not even in the courtroom, which people would probably, they wouldn't agree with. You know, some of even their clientele, or ultimately people who will be on those juries, or corporations or businesses that simply don't want to be affiliated with someone who's controversial in that way. And here's the killer part. It's not necessarily that you're going to do it on purpose, that anyone would go out and intentionally offend another person. I know I wouldn't do it. I don't think that any of you would do it. And that we really have an opportunity by embracing diversity and inclusion as a concept, and thinking about, how do other people feel, right? I know all day how I feel. Each of you know how you feel. And if we don't, we probably need to get in touch with our feelings a little bit, right? But isn't the better part of humanity to think of our fellow person and their experience and what this means to them? And even if our job doesn't say that we can lend them any favors, we don't have to do them any disservice simply because of who God created them as in their own being. And so happy to answer any other questions, but that's where I wanted to start with.
Well, and that is a wonderful framing of what our issues are. And so I thank you very much for that. And you have led beautifully to our next speaker, Joel Stern. And Joel, I guess where we're at, and we can bring up this slide, is it's time to stop admiring the problem and start thinking about solving it. So Joel, here's my question to you. How do we ensure that the changes we are seeing are long-term versus another cycle of words, little actions, or are little more words? How do we move the ball forward? so to speak?
No, it's a great question, Joan, and it was fascinating listening to Rod as well. First, we need to stop admiring the problem. We've been doing that since I became a lawyer in 1984. I always tell people I became a lawyer for two reasons. One, I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. I always wanted to be a doctor. I was terrible at math and science, and I'm proud to say my oldest daughter is a pediatrician in Lake Forest, Illinois, so I get to live my life vicariously through her. And secondly, I became a lawyer because I wanted to effectuate positive change in whatever I did, and define myself a lawyer of 35 years plus in a profession which is dead last with respect to the retaining and promoting of minorities and women is something that is abhorrent to me. And we've been admiring this problem for years. We've been talking about it for years. We've had several different calls to actions. But as you alluded to earlier, they are waves, and they come and they go, and they ebb and they flow. And if you ask me if this is a tipping point, I would be very honest with all of you and say, I don't know. I hope so. I love Malcolm Gladwell and his concepts in his book. But we will only know if this is a tipping point if the numbers show material improvement, and if these great verbose words of what we're going to do to fight for equality in our legal profession is sustainable. And I will call it systemic racism. And the only way to fix that is to have systemic and institutional changes. So the key thing to changing the way the world is today is to look at diversity and inclusion in the legal profession in a very different light than we have historically looked at it. It is not philanthropy. It is not a hobby. It is not a nice to have. For corporate lawyers, it's not a check the box, give the law firms a survey, put it in a drawer and forget about it. To change the world in which we live in, we need to become that change. And in order to become that change, we need to look at this systemically and institutionally. We need to create a program that has program management rigor around it. We have to have accountability. We have to have a mission and vision statement. We have to have goals articulated and measured. We have to use both a carrots and sticks philosophy. You can't just reward the behavior you hope occurs. You need to punish the behavior that is not occurring. We need to look at this like our most critical strategic imperatives, whether in a law firm or a corporation or in private practice. If we do all those things and stand up a program that is good in bad economic times as it is in good economic times, we have some hope that we can do things differently than we've done before.
And so that is an interesting lead-in. So what I'm going to ask you is, can you give our participants some concrete, initiatives or information related to that? Because I don't think anybody thinks they are the problem. I think we're all sensitive to it, but what I'd like us to give our participants is some concrete information to take back to their law offices, their firms, their government offices with, hey, I heard these people speak and they had some ideas for us to think about this problem and spin it in a different way.
I would love to. If you can turn to the slide that has the 4 pillars, because what I have been challenged to do as I go to corporations and law firms is on one slide, explain to people how to create a program with concrete actions. And this is designed more for in-house legal groups, but it's important for law firms to understand this because number one, this is what more and more corporations are doing. And number two, most of this is transferable to your law firm. I've talked on the things on the left-hand side. If your law firm or corporate legal group isn't willing to do everything on the left-hand side, whatever you do will fail. As Joan alluded to, I created a best-in-class D&I program at Accenture in the early 2000s. I saw it work. It continues to do great things today, but I also get to see what other corporations and law firms are doing. What is critical to this slide, concrete, tangible things that you can think about are listed on the 4 pillars. The best corporations, and I would argue the best law firms, look at this from 4 different perspectives, and they devise concrete things to do in each one of these. The first one is internal focused. You cannot tell others what to do unless you're aspiring and doing the things that you ask them to do. Do you have a D&I committee? What does it look like? When I go to law firms and I visit with their D&I committee and they're all under 35 and they're all of a diverse nature and there's not one white male there, that is a problem. I love affinity groups, but my personal opinion is affinity groups don't solve. You need inclusion to solve. So when I visit a law firm and their D&I committee is made up of everybody at all levels, and the white male is rolling up his sleeves and involved in finding solutions, you have a better chance of achieving what you want to achieve. Do you have goals for your internal legal group in your law firm? Do you have mentoring programs in place? Do you have technology that allows you to track what you have and what you are buying from either big firms or tier 2 suppliers, including minority and women-owned law firms? Do you have a D&I program in place? Are you doing all the things on the left-hand side? I can share with you examples of missions and vision statements that corporations have that are working. I can share with you the goals that they've set up. Does every employee in your law firm, from the general counsel to the equity partner to the first-year lawyer or paralegal, have a D&I goal? And are they measured on it? And is their compensation tied to it? Because again, if you don't use carrots and sticks, it will not work. With respect to big firms, and I always tell corporations this, if I am 100% successful in getting you to think about utilizing more minority and women-owned law firms and tier 2 diverse suppliers, 90% of your outside counsel budget is still going to big law. So big law is a critical piece of the puzzle. Are you asking them if they're Mansfield Rule compliant? Are you a signatory to ABA Resolution 113? Are you demanding that big law give you more diverse talent? You can do it one of 3 ways, if not more. JP Morgan Chase demands that 50% of all the lawyers providing work to them are of a diverse personnel. HP has a 10% holdback and will not give law firms that money unless they meet their diversity metrics. Microsoft uses a rewards program. They not only award law firms for achieving certain diversity metrics, they award the in-house counsel for driving business to more diverse lawyers at big law and minority and women-owned law firms. Are you asking your big law firms when they tell you, I cannot find Black talent? Have you asked them to open up their eyes? When they go to Duke and visit with the law students, why aren't they walking 10 minutes away to meet with NCCU, North Carolina Central University? I have met with these kids. They have climbed mountains I've never even seen. And we don't even visit them to give them the opportunity to wow you. So corporations and lawyers and law firms demand that the law firms expand where they are looking for that amazing diverse talent that is out there. Every law firm out here at times has to utilize another law firm. What a great thing to begin asking them today, whether you're at the law firm or your corporation. Whenever you need another law firm, your first go-to should be, can we give the business to a minority women-owned law firm in Missouri or in other states in the United States? The power of partnering is a great way for both the law firms and the corporations to drive more diversity from a supplier diversity perspective. And please note that minorities and women are leaving law firms at 10x the white male. Where are they going? They're either leaving the practice altogether, they're going in-house, which is great, or they're starting their own law firms. All they want is that opportunity to wow you. The third tier is pipeline diversity. In a personal opinion, is if you don't focus on pipeline diversity, you're not going to cure what ails this profession. This is the only panacea. But the best law firms and corporations that focus on pipeline don't only focus on diverse attorneys, they look at law schools, they look at college, they look at high school. And by the way, bar none, the best pipeline initiative I've ever been involved in was with 6th and 7th graders in Chicago, teaching them constitutional law and getting them to understand that being a lawyer and authoritative figure is a good thing. Being a male isn't necessarily a bad thing. giving them a very different perspective. And my favorite story here, and again, just to go out and meet with these kids and plant those seeds so we change the world, is I'll never forget 3 or 4 years ago, I was teaching a school with 2 Black partners, my left and my right. And the class was 99% Black. And there was 1 white young lady in it. At the end of the curriculum, she asked the question, why isn't it all lives matter? And everybody goes, whoosh. The Black partner on my left and the Black partner on my right pointing the fingers to me and said, Joel will take that one. For the next hour and a half, we had the most incredible discussion on why all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. We talked about the genesis of the movement. We talked about what it's like to be Black driving in rural Alabama to get to Tampa, Florida, and the fear that a mother has when they go 5 miles over the speed limit or even not do anything wrong. We need to have the discussion that I had with 6th and 7th grader as lawyers, as adults, if we really want to change the world. Thousands of things we can do with pipeline diversity initiatives. For law firms that want to bring in more diversity, expand your pipeline program to first-year lawyers. Bring them in from schools you normally don't look at. Expose them to corporations. Such incredible things. And then Joan, the last area, which I'll talk about later, is supplier diversity. You cannot ignore the fact that no program is sufficient if you're not giving the minority and women legal talent that has the entrepreneurial courage to start their own firms the opportunity to compete for and win the business, and that business can go to both corporations and to law firms.
From here, and thank you, Joel, for setting the stage. I want to introduce Jonathan Lovitz. And Jonathan, I'd like you to pick up with where Joel left off about some of more diversity issues. Let's address your specific perspective. And can you talk about 3 concrete steps we should be taking to move the needle to change the way we think on this and change what the metrics look like going forward?
Great question. Give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me okay? I was having some mic issues. Okay, excellent. Perfect. Well, first of all, again, thanks to Lars and everyone who put this together. It's a labor of love, especially in the virtual world, so it's always appreciated. 3 concrete steps. First, listen to Rod. Second, listen to Joel. And third, put everything they said into practice. You just heard 2 phenomenal sets of expectations of really what to do. And then I can zip through some of the elements about supplier diversity. And I know, Joel, you had some other slides in there. We can, you tell me whenever you want to go back and go through those in depth. I can pull those right back up. But, you know, it is experiential, it is tactical, it is hard work. Like at the NGLCC, we do not have corporate sponsors, we have partners because we expect a 2-way transactional street. If you want, you know, we know law firms are not hitting the benchmarks when it comes to things like promoting to the top. If we could name 10 senior, 10 major partners at a large law firm that are, Black women of color, or first generation immigrant or veterans, or you name it, we'd all be out of a job. But you know what? None of us can do that. And we've had these programs in place since, in some cases, since the 60s. So what's important is making sure that this permeates, as both gentlemen said, every element of the company. It can't just be in the boardroom, as thank God that new California law is going to mandate that your boards must be as diverse as the communities you serve. But it's also got to mean that your supply chain looks like the communities you serve, that your employee resource group, as Joel so eloquently said, you can't just have women meet on the 3rd Tuesday and the LGBT group meet on the 3rd Wednesday and the African American group will meet on every other Monday. And you never come together, because what's the point then? All you've done is further solidify how great your own silo is doing. If you're going to have a women's history program but don't have a queer woman of color talking about how they are exponentially at a risk for crime, committed against them. A trans woman of color can, 1 in 5 of them can expect to be violently beaten in their lifetime. And if you're not talking about that as an element of both racial and gender justice, you ain't doing your job in your employee resource group. And that can really help open up some eyes about where we can be bringing pro bono work to the forefront from some of our firms, but also where we can affect equity change. And I think that's really what we're going to get at as we talk particularly about supplier diversity, because donations are wonderful. We appreciate everyone who's ever given to some black tie gala, but that's not going to be the world anymore. It'll be years before we have any of those big events at the scale that any of us may have been to before. But more importantly, we're not going to care. No one will remember who put what logo on what step and repeat or supported what open bar anymore. We are going to care that the $100,000 that you would have spent on being the signature sponsor of some law conference is going to apply to a program you had to get a pipeline of 50 new minority law school graduates into a path towards partnership, or that you're investing in 10 minority women, LGBTQ, veteran, et cetera, owned minority small law firms to grow and scale so they can provide the kind of support services you need to not only help them grow as an equitable investment in a minority community, but also if you're trying to grow your law firm and expand to more states and more jurisdictions, the easiest way to do it is hook onto an existing practice somewhere else that's diverse, that has great hooks in the community, that's working with community stakeholders, large law firms, major corporations through supplier diversity initiatives. Stop trying to reinvent the wheel and use these processes that have been in place and invest in them to the point that we all actually grow together. Over the last decade, we've all been saying a rising tide lifts all boats, but we've been saying that from our own boats from across a very large ocean, saying, I hope you're doing very well over there. But my God, we have tied our boats together and said no more. No more rising without making sure we reach down and pull everybody else up with us. Because otherwise, especially in my day-to-day work, as we talk about LGBTQ economic empowerment and increasing opportunities in the legal world, LGBT people are women. We are people of color. We are veterans. We are immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if we think cohesively about this big table, it's not just enough to put seats on it. It's about putting name cards there and saying, take your seat, own it. And as soon as you've got some chips to play, scoot over and let somebody share that seat with you that maybe wasn't invited the first time around.
That is really, that's a question I was going to ask you, is when we think of diversity, what you're talking about is really thinking more broadly, right?
Race and gender were the way we thought about diversity 50 years ago. There is so much more than that. Just look at the fact that we're putting things like pronouns in everyone's email signature, or in my case, in our Zoom handles, because there's so much more to my or anyone else's identity that is not disclosed simply by looking at me. You have no idea if I have a physical or a mental disability simply by looking at me on a Zoom call. But getting to know me, getting to know what I can bring to the table as someone with potentially a disability or with an LGBTQ lived experience, that can be something that can fundamentally change how your practice works. And now, as we'll talk more about in the supplier diversity slides, it's not just a best practice, it's a mandate. Almost every law firm out there, and certainly every major corporation, is trying to achieve the HRC Corporate Equality Index. Many of you know it's parallel to Diversity Inc. and others. If you've got a supplier program or you've got in-house initiatives that help any one community but don't have it be equitably applied across the LGBT community, not only are you not going to get a 100% score anymore, you're also going to lose work. As corporations are telling us, if you don't meet us on par with our D&I initiatives, or even better, get out ahead of them, we're not going to talk anymore, because it's just cashing checks at that point. It's not actually advancing equity anymore.
And so let's talk about that, and we'll go to those slides and talk about.
Great. Joel, well, before we do, I just want to make sure, Joel, we had some other great content behind us. Do you want to back up to any of those to help set some more of the scene on the difference and understanding of women, ethnic minority, et cetera, or should we press on?
Well, I mean, just going through, what you'll see in this presentation, you'll see the numbers. And we don't spend a lot of time having to talk about numbers because nobody's ever challenged us. But, you look at minorities on this slide, just a key metric, after the Great Recession, the percentage of African-American associates at law firms didn't exceed the 2009 number until 2019. The biggest mistake we make in our profession is we take our eye off the prize when anything else gets in the way. And that's what happened after the Great Recession. So the slide before, you'll see women, and I'm bad at math, but women should be 50% at least of every single metric, and they're not. And by the way, a critical takeaway from these slides is what you'll see is when people graduate from law school and they come into firms and corporations, the gap isn't that bad, but as they continue to practice and trajectory up, the gap widens. And when you look at minorities, if you're an African-American female practicing bankruptcy law in Milwaukee, that is a unique set of issues. So another takeaway from these slides is you can't just say minorities, you can't just say women. Even within minorities, you have to look at the unique set of challenges a Black woman has from an Asian American, or a bankruptcy restructuring attorney has from a labor and employment lawyer, or a lawyer in Chicago versus a lawyer in Boston. And that's really the intent of these slides. The other thing, and it's just a critical piece about whether we focus on diversity inclusion for moral or business reasons, and the answer, by the way, is both. We as lawyers have normative obligations to do more and to not discriminate. But I can show you analytic after analytic that says that corporations that have figured this out make more money, have higher cash flow, have more innovative decisions, retain their talent, attract more talent. And by the way, law firms that have figured this out, there are studies that show that profits per partner will increase by at least 100, and I've seen 280,000, some of the law firms, if they have figured out diversity inclusion more than others. So we need to focus on this because it's both the smart thing and the right thing to do, because our employee base is heterogeneous, and because for the most part, our consumers are heterogeneous. How can we be at our best when we are homogeneous and the people we're serving are heterogeneous? The other thing, sorry.
Joel, I do want to, that does tie in exactly with what Rod was saying, is this isn't good, the math isn't good. This isn't good business. It's not a good allocation of resources. Is that what you're talking about as well?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I became a lawyer and immediately I fell in love with diversity inclusion because it was the right thing to do. That's all I needed. I was raised with those values, thankfully, as a young child. I matured and developed them. And by the way, in 1984, I was focused on gender. And I realized, boy, gender is easy compared to minority. And then I looked at the LGBTQ community. So I have evolved over time. But I appreciate that some lawyers will not buy into this unless you show them the money. Mm-hmm. And we can show you through analytics that corporations and law firms that do more in this space do better. So I can show you it's the smart thing to do. And it's sad that I have to sell it that way, but I can sell it that way.
Well said.
The other thing, that I don't want to lose sight of, because it's really worthy of an hour it's worthy of an hour presentation once a month for 12 months, is the notion of implicit bias. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what it meant 5 years ago. I took the Harvard implicit bias test for only one reason back in 2013 or 14, and that was to confirm that I have no biases, because I'm self-aware, I'm a lawyer, I'm professional, I know my warts, I know my good stuff, my good traits. That test is a mandate, should be, for every single person in our profession, because we all have biases. And if you want, and by the way, I'm not going to focus on conscious biases, because I don't think I'm going to change the mind of the racist. And that's what I spent a career doing, and I was very unsuccessful. I would rather focus on people who want to do the right thing that aren't doing the right thing because they're not aware their brain is telling them to do something and they're doing it. We have got to understand our biases, whether it's gender, ethnicity, gay versus straight, beauty versus perceived unattractiveness, because once we untap the biases that we have that we're not aware of, I was 55 years old before I knew I had any biases that I wasn't aware of. But once I uncovered that, I've taken steps every day to minimize the impact of those biases on what I do in the legal profession. So don't minimize the impact of understanding this critically important topic. And it's as relevant for the managing equity partner at the biggest law firm in the world to, again, that first-year lawyer. Take that test, because implicit bias is having a huge impact on our ability to move the ball forward.
Brilliant.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, it was just as he so often is. Joel was right on the money there, and I'm just curious, Raj, anything we missed there? I think it was particularly important, but I think that as I have regularly said, the privilege of privilege, especially as a cisgendered white man, is to be invited into rooms, and then the best thing I can do with that is to shut up and let somebody else talk that doesn't have my life experience. So, did we miss anything? Is there other context that you want to throw in there? Because I think that's really important.
No, John, and I think that the points that have been raised today by you and Joel were just phenomenal. I mean, I truly do. I think that it's the right way to be talking about these issues. And then if we can keep these in mind, we can do such a service, not only for our communities and our families and, ultimately our own satisfaction with our lives, right? We're not going to make a career of hurting people and feeling good about it. If we can eliminate those missed opportunities to be more inclusive, to bring in people, whether they're on the jury or on the street, and they could be in our front door or be in a boardroom and have the capacity to talk in a different language than some of our brethren and sisters here in the bar, and therefore have better opportunities, that this is the right thing. It's good for people. It's good for the bottom line. Well said, my friend. Well, and that's sort of the perfect segue back to where we started. Joel, I know you talked a little bit about some of the supplier diversity slides, mentioned NAMWOLF, and if you wanted to give any more context here, you tell me.
You talked about my mother taught me I have one mouth and two ears. I should listen twice as much as I talk. I have violated that rule every day of my life. I would love to talk a little bit about NAMWOLF because it really is the hidden gem.
And it's a business solution, as you were saying. It is a bottom line driver that not only gets it right, but shows you how practically to do this at scale.
And this is a quality value play, not a feel bad for the Asian American female that started her own law firm. NAMWOLF sells itself on, do you want equal, if not better quality? Do you want great value? And do you want to support your corporation supplier diversity initiatives? I've never met a supplier diversity initiative or person who manages it where they have told me that legal is exempt. But many people are 100% focusing on big law or tier 1 suppliers, which again is incredible. We need to demand more diversity from IBM, from Microsoft, from Kirkland, from Sidley, and we need to keep doing that. But we also need to understand that minorities and women have been economically, historically disadvantaged in whatever they have done for 400 years in the United States. And when they go off and they start their own corporation, whether it's amazing people at Alaris or a law firm or another tier 2 supplier, we need to give them the opportunity to showcase how great they are. NAMWOLF is all about D&I in the legal profession, but with a razor-like focus on supplier diversity. Our view is that for corporations and law firms to really help fight for equality in our profession, we have to give the amazing minority and women and LGBTQ-owned lawyers that start their own law firms the opportunity to get the business. But I've never met a minority or women-owned lawyer, whether they're part of NAMWOLF or not, who says, give me the business because I'm Black, or give me the business because I'm gay. What they do say, and I think it's fair, is would you let me in the door to show you how incredible I am, and how smart I am, and how nice I am? And only give me the business if I meet whatever quality and value indicia that you use to pick any other law firm. But if you're not letting me in the door and you don't have overt action to do that, whether you're a law firm looking for other law firms or a corporation, you are really not helping the legal system become equal. You can go to the next slide, because again, you can read these and I could talk forever about NAMWOLF. Again, Joan, takeaways. Don't ever go on the internet looking for a law firm anymore. Reach out to me, reach out to my team, go on our website. We have a network of over 3,000 attorneys, almost 200 law firms that practice in a myriad of different practice areas. And they came from big law. And they not only survived, but they thrived. And they do complex, tough work for Fortune 500 corporations. This is what NAMWOLF is about. I'll end it with this. NAMWOLF is a gourmet kitchen. And the delicacies are these 3,000 attorneys that are all minority women or LGBTQ owned. You are the chef, whether you're a law firm or a corporation. come shop for some incredible delicacies. You will not be displeased.
Is there a diversity Michelin star? Can we get you one of those? That's pretty awesome. I love how you sum that up.
I'm selling what I bought, right? I brought NAMWOLF in to Accenture in 2003, and they're still there, so it's easy to sell.
Well, and that's a great segue, because what the sort of value premise you put there is what I'm going to show in some of these supplier slides. Of course, some of my context that I'm putting here in these slides is from the LGBT sphere, because that's where I immediately work, but replace that with any diverse community, and the value proposition is the same. Especially part one, and for everyone, as we're coming out of COVID, we're all tightening our belts. I've heard it from every chief financial officer at both corporate and law firms. We got to do more with less, and one of the best ways to do that is tie that to your diversity goals. Stop overspending for big law, and let a highly qualified diverse supplier fill that for you. Because when you've got more diverse companies competing, you've got more competition, which results in better bid prices, and then your company saves money, which ultimately can get reinvested in the kinds of equity building programs that get more minorities up the ladder into the senior partnership levels, or however else you want to define that success. It's all about creating that equitable paradigm. And I think, it really is, as both Joel and Rod were saying, it adds value at every level. It's visibility, it's opportunity, it's equity. And you've got partners. You've got organizations like mine and WeBank and others that do the certifying work and do the capacity building. You've got phenomenal groups like NAMWOLF that does sort of the placement work that really is a phenomenal concierge of coming to bat for these firms and saying, put them to work, you won't be sorry. And what's amazing is, we were saying before, diversity as a definition is changing. You've got LGBT, disability, veteran, hub zone, all of these other diverse categories that are each individually certifiable, each individually searchable through their networks. The days of saying, I just can't find a smaller diverse law firm to help me with my needs, or really any other legal supplier, those days are gone, because there are just so many, and they're more on the way every day. And it's about thinking holistically. I love this, that, I put this together around the housing industry when I spoke at a conference for them, because they were really trying to figure out, well, if we build houses or we're real estate agents, how does supplier diversity fit in our work? I'm not actually the construction company, or I'm not actually, whatever it is that may be doing the buying. There is an element of it in everything that you purchase. So think about, legal services, whether you're the supplier or the buyer, filters into every part of getting the product done. But whether you are the law firm or you're who is going to contract them, you got to print your capability statements and all of that lovely swag you hand out. I get those gift bags at every law firm conference, and someone's got to make those. And if you're a company who's going to talk about your diversity and inclusion values, but then just go use Vistaprint instead of using a Black-owned, woman-owned, LGBT-owned print shop to do all that work for you, my God, have you missed the point? The same is true with your advertising and your media, your office staffing, especially as we're all working remote. I mean, we have made thousands of recommendations to video production companies and virtual production studios that can make your Zoom call look like it was the Grammys. So don't sell yourself short when, especially in this time, we're trying to all get smarter and do more with less, but you don't have to sacrifice your inclusion initiatives. In fact, you can achieve and surpass them by tying savings and bottom line growth with your diversity principles. And sometimes it just takes spelling it out. I can't tell you the number of times people said, well, we just don't buy external counsel. And I go, great, but do you buy coffee? Because you could source that from the SBA's Small Business of the Year of 2016, a lesbian-owned coffee company, the first to ever get that designation. IT, furniture, catering, all that stuff. Don't tell me you're not buying it. I know you are. So all of that can be diverse sourced, and your external counsel, and your document prep, and your everything you buy. I mean, we've got an African-American lesbian woman-owned stenography company in New York City. I just love telling that, because people would say, well, I can't find any one of those minorities. And I'm like, well, you've got 3 in 1. By all means, get to work. Talk about that intersectional lived experience. But it's so smart because they are able to give you that sort of nimbleness and the entrepreneurial experience behind these companies. I mean, just talk to Deb and the Alaris gang. They know how to survive and thrive in the most critical times because they were born out of an entrepreneurial mindset. They're not these, they're not the Cravath behemoths out there trying to, waddle their way down Fifth Avenue during a crisis. They can be lean and nimble and get the job done at the scale, and particularly at the financing scale that will make everyone happy, particularly in this new COVID paradigm. And I love this case study from BakerBots because they were the first ones to put it right up on their website and say, do you sell this stuff? Let us know, we buy it. Front of the line if you're minority, woman-owned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because we want to celebrate that. Because we as a firm know we're not quite hitting all the benchmarks going up the ladder with inclusive partners and visible, diverse leaders, but we sure can say, every pen that you're going to pick up from this office was sourced by if our office is in Chicago, we supported a Black-owned print shop in Chicago that's going to do all the BakerBots pens for them. And that's a great way to kick the door open and say, well, who else do you know in your network? Who are we not working with that could really help us not just drive this bottom line solution through supplier diversity, but more importantly, strengthen our foothold in these diverse communities? Because you may just hear that pen or that paper supplier or that coffee distributor you're using, as Joel said, might have the son or daughter in law school that could be the perfect intern candidate for you, but you never would have met them because you were not engaging in these diverse communities. So all that to say, let us help you.
Well, and that is just a wonderful sum up, Jonathan. I cannot applaud you more for how well you brought that full circle. We are open to questions. We only have a couple minutes. If anybody has anything they want to ask any of these esteemed panel members, I am so thrilled with getting all three of you on our panel to talk about this. I also want to make sure everyone knows they can reach out to any of these individuals for what the NAACP in Missouri is doing and what ideas they might have about diversity and inclusion, how to drive that to your law firm, what is happening at NAMWOLF and who their panel is and what you can look at. And Jonathan, your supplier diversity talk is those are all these small businesses in COVID that are begging for the business now. More than ever, it's become more pressing, whether we like it or not, in our the turmoil that COVID has caused us. But I want to say
one thing there, because I think as both Joel and Rod said, do remember though, the engaging of a diverse supplier, whether it's your direct legal contact or someone in another field that you're purchasing, it ain't a handout. It's not charity. This is equity. This is what your diversity mission statement means when you say you're trying to create opportunity. And if you can help that small woman-owned firm grow to capacity that they can become your competitor, that's when you've done your job in law.
Well, I just think you've done such a nice job. I really want to thank all three of our speakers for your time, for your energy, and for giving us some strategies here instead of I wanted Rod to frame the problem, but you guys gave us so much more than that. You gave us some ideas. Let's be the solution. And hopefully those who participated and watched our webinar, we ignited some ideas for them to be the solution.
Joan, there's a great question in the Q&A box about second tier, and I know we sort of glossed over those terms, and certainly Joel and I and any of our supplier diversity peers could help point you in the direction for some of that glossary. There is a bit of alphabet soup, especially with the acronyms and a lot of weird words, but what we've been talking about contracting as a solution for people to achieve that equity. And tier one is you contract me to do the work. That's it, one-to-one direct relationship. Most often, the supplier diversity relationship is going to be tier two. You're the subcontractor. And not only is that the way to prove your capability and scalability and achievability of the goals that a company might have, those KPIs on using a vendor, it's also a great way for each one of you who's potentially watching this CLE to be thinking about getting more work. So for example, if you put if you're doing remote depositions and you know that you could have someone on your team at a high billable rate do it, or contract a diverse, local woman-owned LGBT whatever supplier in the local region there who'll do it at half the cost and do just as great a job. Not only are you paying it forward by supporting someone, as you said, Joan, who needs the work and deserves it right now, that also gets to be someone you put on your capability statement to say, I commit to tier 2 subcontractor work that helps spread the dollars of this contract across everyone and across every community. And corporations look for that. If you try to go pitch the general counsel of Wells Fargo and say, I'm diverse, or even I'm not diverse, but I'd like to work with you, and they'll go, great, well, where are you spending with diverse communities? Show me, lead with that so that it matches our diversity values. Again, it's not just the external counsel you hire. You could also say, like you, Wells Fargo, or insert any other corporation, I also hit a D&I goal of 20% spend. My coffee, my pens, my paper, the chauffeur service I used to get here, each one of those was sourced from a local minority business organization, so I could invest back in those communities just as your company does. If they hear that kind of language, that's how you build that kind of lasting relationship. And it could start at tier 2 and very quickly move you and that minority firm to being the tier 1 prime contract holder.
Wow, that's it. I wasn't even sure what tier 2 meant. I get it now. Thank you, gentlemen. Really, this has been really a delight to be the moderator for. I've enjoyed all 3 of your presentations. And I want to reach out to all our attendees that these guys are available for you and they're happy to talk to you. So is Jen Matthew at Alaris, and Deb Weaver, Alaris is a woman-owned disadvantaged business as well. This is something they've taken to heart, and it's a large part of why we decided to go ahead and put this on, to give some strategies to our attendees so we move the needle forward. We be part of the solution.
Well done. Thank you for moderating. Great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful panel. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.